Member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am proud to rise today in support of Budget Implementation Act No. 2. This act ensures that important provisions in Budget 2013 are implemented. Before discussing the highlights of the bill, I want to mention the government's plan for balancing the budget, and I also want to mention Canada's economic success. Now, this government has an effective plan to balance the budget by 2015. It's a challenging task, but achievable. As with Budget 2013, Mr. Speaker, this bill will help the government to achieve financial sustainability. World leaders, of course, are very interested in Canada as a result of our government's example and our economic success. Canada leads the G7 in job creation, in income growth, and in keeping debt levels low. Canada is among the few countries in the world with a AAA credit rating. The government's continued sound fiscal management will generate continued respect. But despite our strong financial performance, there are still challenges that we must face. The United States is experiencing ongoing difficulties. The European Union is continuing its long upward climb. Now, last week's historic trade deal between Canada and the European Union shows our government's determination to seize international opportunities for Canada. The government must reduce its deficit so that Canadians will be encouraged to do the same. We must practice what we preach. The deficit was a justified response to the 2008-09 economic recession, but it must be temporary. By 2015, the government will balance the budget and will introduce legislation to encourage balanced budgets in the future. This will ensure that in normal economic times, there will be concrete guidelines for returning to balance after any economic crisis. With an aggressive debt-to-GDP target of 25% by the year 2021 and a plan in place, this government is on the right track. I'm proud that the government, during and after the world's worst economic recession in almost 80 years, remains recognized around the world as an example for others to follow. I'm very proud of the leadership of our Prime Minister and our Finance Minister. Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, this bill delivers real solutions for Canadians, and it reflects the goals of reducing the country's deficit and returning to balanced budgets. I want to highlight three aspects of the bill that I'm particularly pleased with. I'll elaborate on how this bill will support job creators, close tax loopholes, and also respect taxpayer dollars. Job creation is especially important to me as the representative of Kitchener Centre. BlackBerry, based in Kitchener-Waterloo, has suffered losses over the past couple of years, and some of my constituents are on the hunt for jobs that match their highly talented skills. We enjoy some business incubators which support startup companies, and these include the renowned Communitech and also programs at the University of Waterloo and Wilfrid Laurier University, world-class leading centres of education. As Canada's Small Business Week wraps up tomorrow, I'm grateful to say that this bill extends the hiring credit for small business. This will benefit 560,000 job creators across Canada, and hundreds of those job creators are in my region of Kitchener-Waterloo. With over 1 million jobs created since the depth of the global recession, this hiring credit will create even more places for the bright minds of Canada's future. The bill also freezes employment insurance rates for 3 years, leaving $660 million in the pockets of job creators and workers in 2014 alone. EI costs employees and employers hard-earned money. When I look at small businesses employing just 2 or 3 or 4 individuals, I see that this freeze will help owners to balance their books, just as the government is balancing its books. The government will also help the environment through the expansion of the accelerated capital cost allowance to include investments in clean energy generation. I was very pleased to see this. It adds to the government's existing investment for small business, which is given through small business financing program offered by Industry Canada and by loans offered by the Business Development Bank and by grants from the Canadian Youth Business Foundation. Achieving clean energy solutions is a priority. The challenge business owners face is to secure initial capital to develop those long-term solutions. Finding cost-efficient clean energy solutions is critically important for our future, and developing those solutions takes extensive research. As a longtime member of the Environment Committee, I'm always looking for ways to ensure a sustainable future, and job creators will be encouraged to continue looking for clean energy generation through the accelerated capital cost allowance measure in this bill. I'm confident that Bill C-4 will benefit small businesses, startups, and job creators in Kitchener Centre over the next number of years based on these new initiatives. A second focus within this bill is closing tax loopholes and combating tax evasion. And I want to highlight the importance of these measures. Hard-working taxpayers can be confident that this bill will ensure that everyone pays their fair share of taxes. When everyone is paying their fair share, it keeps taxes low for Canadian families, and it creates incentives to invest in Canada. The government will introduce new administrative monetary penalties and offences to deter the use, possession, sale, and development of software designed to falsify records for the purpose of tax evasion. Although this government will always keep taxes low, we insist that all citizens pay all of their required taxes, and heavier penalties will force wrongdoers to use proper software and pay what they owe. The government will also close more tax loopholes related to money transfers to again ensure that everyone pays their fair share. The government has already introduced rules to prevent foreign affiliates from converting otherwise taxable surplus income into the form of loans. There's also an information reporting regime for tax avoidance transactions. Finally, the government will extend in certain circumstances the time for Canada Revenue Agency to reassess taxpayers who fail to report income from foreign property. The third point that I will highlight are measures to respect taxpayer dollars through initiatives introduced in March, scheduled to be rolled out upon budget approval. For example, by modernizing the Canada STEM Student Loans Program with digital communication, the government will deliver efficient ways for students to pay down their debt quickly and to apply for loan approvals or extensions sooner. Another timely measure in the Economic Action Plan 2013 are steps to prevent abuse of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, abuses which concern my constituents. The Temporary Foreign Worker Program was created to fill acute labour needs when Canadians are not available. And this program was never intended to bring in temporary foreign workers to replace Canadian workers. The reforms brought forward in the spring budget stem from the government's ongoing review of this program. The budget, for example, increases the government's ability to revoke work permits, enabling immediate action against employers who don't comply with the rules. These changes will also require that employers using the Temporary Foreign Workers Program pay temporary foreign workers the prevailing wage for a job. Now, these are common sense changes to the program to remove unintended incentives to hire foreign workers. And these reforms, Mr. Speaker, will ensure that Canadians are always at the front of the hiring line. Other measures will deliver important savings for Canadians. The fact is, for example, that many products needed to support families are consistently priced higher in Canada than in the United States. By removing tariffs on imported baby clothing and sports equipment, Budget 2013 will make sure that difference is reduced. So, Mr. Speaker, we can all be pleased that the Budget Implementation Bill number 2 delivers a solid plan for creating jobs and economic growth, all while keeping taxes low and still balancing the budget by 2015. This bill is great news for my constituents in Kitchener Centre. I invite all members of the House to join me in supporting jobs, growth, and long-term economic prosperity. Vote yes to this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Alfred Pélan. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague opposite for his remarks. A little earlier today, the head of the Treasury Board had trouble answering some questions by my colleague, the member for Pontiac, with respect to a designation as an essential service for Canadians. And this is contained in Bill C-4. The definition of essential service is no longer determined in conjunction with employees and the government. This will be decided unilaterally by the government. My question is simple for the member opposite. According to the Conservative government, which services specifically will be deemed essential services?
Sure.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for the question, but I find her preamble really quite surprising because I have known and watched the President of the Treasury Board for many, many years, and I find him to be not only very articulate, but as with all of the ministers on this side of the House, very hard-working and very dedicated to the best interests of all Canadians. And in fact, I look forward to working with him for many more years to come. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that everything that a government does is subject to law and to judicial interpretation and to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And although I have some experience in law, I don't pretend to be an expert, not nearly as much of an expert, I'm sure, as my colleague opposite on labor unions and their rights. I suspect she's an expert, but I think that the courts pretty well jealously look after charter guarantees of freedom of association and that labor rights are protected accordingly. And I expect that any decision made by this government to designate an essential public service will be based on real need and quite justifiable to the courts or anyone else.
Hear, hear.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Mr. Speaker, we notice that the government has these logos or terms that they like to talk a lot about, the Economic Action Plan, job growth and long-term security. And they take these slogans that they develop and they literally spend millions and millions and millions of dollars, in excess of $500 million. That's $500 million in terms of advertising, trying to get Canadians to think that these are wonderful times. Yet, you know, the most popular petition that I had and that I've been tabling, Mr. Speaker, is one that affects seniors. It's the government's decision to increase the age of retirement from 65 to 67. If the economy is doing so well, my question to the member is, why does he feel the government is determined to make the change of increasing retirement for seniors from 65 to 67?
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his question and comments. And I'm tempted to say, considering that that question came from a member of the Liberal Party, that there is nothing that can compare to the $1 billion that the Ontario Liberal Party wasted on moving gas plants. And I must say that this member and his party have nothing to complain about when it comes to the question of government expenditures. Mr. Speaker, on the question of the change of retirement age. It may have escaped this member's notice, but when the original OAS scheme was introduced in the 1960s, the average life expectancy was in around 72 or 73 years, and consequently retiring at age 65 meant something entirely different than it means today, when the average life expectancy is in fact more like 83 or 85 years. The costs of supporting someone through a longer retirement are just an economic reality, and as much as the third party and the NDP might wish to ignore economic realities, a responsible government can't. Also, the demographics have changed. People living longer and healthier means that there are more elders who need to be supported by fewer people still participating in the working economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise de débat.